Welcome to another CHRO Conversation, hosted by the Center for Executive Succession at the Darla Moore School of Business. I'm your host, Anthony Nyberg, and today we are speaking with Tom Plath, who is the Senior Vice President of HR and Global Citizenship for International Paper, where he has worked since 1991. As the head of HR for International Paper, Tom serves on the executive leadership team and is responsible for ensuring that the more than 52,000 IP workers who serve customers in more than 150 different countries are aligned to optimize success. Thank you very much for coming to South Carolina. We sincerely appreciate having you down here. IP has been a great partner of ours for a very long time, and of course, your son was part of our program.
He was.
So thank you for coming down.
Very welcome, my pleasure.
So can we just jump in and tell me a little bit about, because you've had tremendous experience in thinking about strategy and the like in terms of driving business success. Where do you think HR can help drive business success the most going forward over the next 5 years or so?
Yeah, that strategy topic is I think is a really critical topic for HR to know and to own. In order for HR people to be able to help drive the strategy and to support what we need to do about strategy and the work of the company, they need to understand the strategy first, right? That has to be the very first step, is understand what it is that the plan is going to take us to in the next few years. When we think about our angle on that, if I'm having a conversation with a senior leader, the first large portion of the discussion is about their business. Asking questions, talk to me about the customers, talk to me about how the operations are working. We, at the end, get to the people imperatives that go along with those, but not till the end of the conversation. I think our first role in HR is to really understand the strategy and how it's affecting the businesses. Then we can ask, what's the human capital strategy that will support that? And what's the HR strategy then that will support the human capital strategy? And that's the work that we've been spending a lot of time on in International Paper, to understand if this is the strategy, a customer-facing strategy, how does HR, which is one step removed from that, how do we impact that? And that's a continuous dialogue for us. It's something that if HR doesn't understand the business, there's no way that we can do what we can. If we do understand the business, it's a tremendous leverage point for the organization.
And is that the order then? It's company strategy, what's the human capital strategy that needs to support that, and then what can HR do? And maybe that's also an HR strategy that supports those two?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting learning for me even just in the last year. We have always had a very robust business strategy. Since probably 2008, we have had what I would say is a fairly sophisticated HR strategy. And I was at a session recently, and I realized we are missing the part in the middle. What we're missing is, what is it that the human capital of the organization can provide to International Paper that can support and drive business success? And then below that is what the HR organization can do to support that. And we were missing that middle piece. So we've spent a tremendous amount of time in the last 6 to 8 months asking ourselves the question, what human capital strategies will most significantly impact the business strategy and the business success of International Paper? And that's now what we're working on. And it shapes and transforms your HR strategy, because now you're working on what is in alignment with business success.
That's extremely interesting, and I don't think we think about that very much generally from an HR perspective, of even what it means to have a human capital strategy and then how HR strategy can really support that. Can you just say a little bit more about what that means, like at IP, for instance?
I think it's instructive to think about how we actually put this thing together. The very first step that we did was we had the CFO come in and talk about the strategy of International Paper. And as Tim Nichols, our CFO, was reviewing that strategy and we were looking around the room at each other, we realized we may not all know and understand the strategy as well as we should, and if we don't, what about the rest of the organization? The very first item in our human capital strategy is know the plan. Understand when we talk at International Paper about creating advantage positions in attractive markets. What does that mean exactly? what does that say to us individually in our businesses that we have to do? And then as individuals, what do we have to do to support that as well? So it was very humbling at first to realize, wow, even the top of our HR organization, myself included, may not have as robust of an understanding of our strategy. And if we don't, we need to help everyone else too as well. So we went through this process. We used a former CHRO from DuPont, Benito Cascinaro, who helped us. He was on the telephone with us. He's written a article about the 4 pillars of human capital strategy. So we went through that whole process, and in about 2.5 hours, we came up with the 5 primary pillars that we're going to use as a human capital strategy going forward.
So that then really adds a layer of communication being part of the HR role, and really, as you talked about, HR driving business success in part through the human capital strategy, but really understanding that strategy. So overall, it just means HR is driving business success? Is that
I think so. And you bring up a great point about the overlap with communications. And I think about this a lot. I think in terms, this a little wonky, but I think in terms of Venn diagrams a lot. And where are the overlaps? And I think there is a very significant overlap between HR and communications, for instance. It's very, very difficult for us owning the responsibility for the culture, for the development, for the recruiting and the retention of the entire population without having a connection with them through communications. And so one of the things that we ask ourselves a lot is, well, what is a communication strategy that goes along with this human capital strategy? And in the case of the human capital strategy, that first item that I was talking about, they actually merged completely. As a part of the human capital strategy, we need to communicate more about the strategy of the company. Very, very fundamental, but really, really important.
So now you've had a really interesting career path, because you were in HR and then went out and ran businesses and head of strategy for a while. So can you say a little bit about how your HR background maybe helped you in those roles, and then how those roles helped you coming back to lead the HR function entirely?
Sure. I joke with people that the time when I was out of HR, running businesses, thinking about strategy, thinking about operations, thinking about customers, it probably crystallized my HR knowledge more when I was outside of HR than when I was inside, because you realize very, very quickly what was important. The HR roles that I had prior to the strategy, the operations, the commercial role, and then the general management role, there is a really principal part of leading that is having an understanding about the impact of your actions on the people that you lead. HR is in the absolute center of that. And so when I came into those non-HR roles, I understood that aspect of leadership. I understood, how do you take a group of people, motivate them, get them all aligned, et cetera. And that was based on my HR experience. The non-HR experience, it was probably the most significant HR development. As counter as that sounds, it's the most significant HR development that I've had in my career. You realize, as a general manager with HR people working for you, here's what's important that they do. They make sure that we've got the right team on the field. They make sure that the team is engaged, that we're retaining them, that we're making sure that there is an engagement approach, an engagement culture in the organization. And the other thing that they do that nobody else can do is they think ahead. They anticipate what the issues of tomorrow are that we should be working on right now. And so in my role today, when I talk to HR people, I talk about readiness a lot. What are we doing today that creates readiness for tomorrow? What are you thinking about? What are you anticipating that's going to be absolutely critical, not for tomorrow, today's success, but for success a year from now, and 2 years, and 5 years from now? Let's start working on that stuff now.
So is that something you then recommend to people and employ for yourself, for people that you think may have the ability to rise to the top of an HR position, that they should go out at some point and lead a business function or get out somehow?
The principle that I talk to with people is that the more varied your experiences are, the better your perspective. The better your perspective, the better you're going to be able to lead in a role like this. And so whatever that means to people, there are going to be people who have the opportunity to go and live somewhere else like I did, or lead a business like I did. But those aren't the specific ingredients, I don't think, Anthony. I think that I think that the way to think about this is the more varied the experience, the broader the foundation. The broader that foundation is, the greater the likelihood of success in the future.
Okay, so that's a really important then caveat. So it's the breadth of these experiences. It's not that you have to go be a line manager at some point. You have to go lead strategy.
I always encourage people to get into roles that are as close to the operations and the customers as they can. I think about HR roles as being close to the operations and potentially close to the customers too. So you can get a lot of this type of development even in HR roles if you're doing the HR roles like that. If you're thinking about what are the customer implications of this, of the retention of our employees, right? How do we use safety and the work on safety to build the engagement of our workforce? If you think that way, HR can be a business leader who happens to specialize in the HR function.
Another thing I want to touch on is you mentioned that your experience in HR helped you be a better leader. Now, leadership is taught all around the country, mostly in MBA programs, and HR is really never a component of that, or at least not HR the way we often think of HR. So can you say a little bit about what that was in HR, what experience that was that helped you be a better leader?
Sure. I got feedback within the first few months. My first role in HR, I was in a manufacturing facility. I was working for an HR leader for that manufacturing facility as a generalist. I was coming out of an academic environment where I had gotten an MBA. I knew a lot about HR, I thought, at the time. And he told me, you need to go out into the facility and talk to people. And I said, Andy, you want me, you're going to pay me to go out and just talk to people? And he said, yes, because when you need to have the relationships with them, that is not the time to develop the conversations, etc. So go and talk to them now, develop a relationship, understand how they think, what motivates them, and then when you get into a crisis, you're going to be able to get right to the answer. It was really strong advice for me. It was not a natural thing for me, but as I started to get out and talk to the various people in our facilities, in International Paper, this is the term I always use, 70% of our employees wear steel-toed shoes and get paid by the hour. That's who International Paper is today, and I got to know them really well. I got to know that group of the organization. I developed an intense respect for them, for the way that they thought, who they were, what they could contribute, and I realized that we probably weren't taking advantage of their heads as much as we were their hands. And so that's the mentality that I went into a leadership role with, that even if I didn't know the answer, somebody did, and there is the power of a team that far, far surpassed the power of individuals.
So, and that ties very closely. You and I were talking a little bit earlier about one of the ways that you try to go get information and try to understand and really meet with people and get that feedback that maybe not just the feedback that you want to hear. Can you share a little bit about your style, your leadership style that way, and why that's effective?
When I was in a role where I was going out and visiting facilities a lot, I would get asked the question, who do you want to talk to when you come and visit us? And my response would be, I want to talk to the people who don't know what not to tell me. I want straight talk. And I think if that's the type of expectation that you go in with, that I'm not interested in all the niceties and all the filtered feedback. I want real feedback, because that's what's going to make us better and we can build excellence together. I think that's tremendously powerful. And so you need to be able to, though, be willing to receive that. You're not going to hear things all the time that you like, that you agree with. It gets us to another leadership competency that I think is really, really important, and that's restraint and objectivity and thinking and being willing. People always talk about listening. In order to listen well, you have to be restrained. You have to stop thinking about what you want to think about and process what you're hearing. And you need to be objective about that and be able to fill out both sides of the ledger accurately and truthfully. If you can do that and have that type of conversation with people, there are just gold mines all over the place of information and insights that people have that we would never have gotten unless we had that type of environment.
It actually sounds extremely powerful when you put it in the terms of the 70% wear the steel-toed shoes, and that maybe we're not using their mind, we're not tapping into their minds as much as we could. That sounds like a tremendous resource to drive growth and innovation if you can listen, if you can hear.
International Paper has spent over the last number of years billions of dollars in capital. We have asset-intensive facilities. We have to keep them up. We spend an incredible amount of money to make sure that our equipment and our facilities are running well. The way I always frame this is that if we could, through engagement and leadership strategies, get that last 10%, right? The discretionary effort that gets you across the finish line first. If you can get that, I believe that we can deliver the same amount or more value than those billions of dollars of capital. And the great news is, it doesn't cost a thing. It costs time and effort and approach, but it's tremendously powerful, and that's where HR starts to come in. HR as a function should own or feel like they own the process of engaging our workforce and making sure that we can get as much as we can out of the human capital that comes to work for us every day, that we pay to provide excellence for us every day. HR should be the one that takes responsibility to say, how do we get the return on that investment?
You were an internal promotion to lead the HR function.
Right.
But it turns out for that CHRO level, internal promotions are really relatively rare compared to positions like CFO or even CEO. Can you say a little bit about why it was probably advantageous for you to come in from inside to that role?
Sure.
And if you have any thoughts on why that's so rare?
Yeah, I'm going to start with the second part first about the likelihood to go external to get a CHRO. And I think it's a backhanded compliment for the function, actually. Why do organizations go and look outside for CHRO? Because they realize these are tremendously impactful positions. Change is an element of what these leaders do, and what they're looking for is the best change leader. And sometimes the way to think about change is to not have had the inside experience. And so I think what organizations are doing when they go outside is actually affirming the value of the function, the need for the function to drive change, and they believe that there's a greater likelihood for that if they go outside than stay inside. You asked the question about how my internal experience. I was with International Paper for about 25 years before I took this role. I don't know that there could be a better way to lead HR and to prepare to be a leader of HR than to understand who the people of the company are, to understand what the business is and how it functions. I know International Paper. I know the people, I know the strategies, I know the facilities, I know how we get work done. And so that, for me, has been a significant advantage. I haven't had to figure that out. The way that I manage and the way that I lead, it's a very, very important component of being successful in this role. It's understanding the company, all the layers, how the matrix works, how things work inside of the organization, and that's just enabled success. It's allowed me to get around corners faster.
So that's quite a paradox, that there's this tremendous advantage to coming from within, and yet a compliment is how you phrased it, to going outside, and particularly if change is desired.
Yeah, and so I think the imperative for people who are with a company for a long time who want to get to the top role is you have to have substitute experiences that will enable you to have that external perspective. I'm not a natural networker. I've never done this well. I know I have to get better at it, so I have coping mechanisms. I get involved with a lot of groups who talk about important topics. I force myself to get inside of these conversations so that I can continue to learn from others. That's how I did it. It's how I started to get that perspective that we discussed before, so that there wasn't a gap in the ability to drive change and understand what was possible. You combine that with the ability to get around corners faster, and it can be a fairly strong proposition.
Another area that we talk about or learning more about in terms of the CHRO's role is that role on the executive leadership team. And there's still some question about whether the executive leadership team is really a team or a collection of individuals that are high performers, each running their own function. Do you have a thought on how much that group should actually be
The answer to
a
that
team?
question is yes. It's both, I believe, and I think it varies over time. I think there's a very high degree of difficulty with having a highly functioning team in the C-suite. It's hard. You have tremendously talented people who have risen to a level in the organization because of their successes and how they've led, and those aren't all the same. And so figuring out how to coalesce all of those different experiences and viewpoints is a challenge. I always go back to this. Stephen Covey's son, I believe, wrote a book called The Speed of Trust. The premise of the book is that if you trust each other, you can go faster because you're not worrying about what other people's intentions are. And so I think one of the most important characteristics of a high-performing executive team is that we trust each other's intentions. And what that allows you to do then is it allows you to not worry about, are they acting in self-interest or in the interest of the enterprise? Are they doing something that could potentially hurt something that I'm working on today? And so I believe that trust component is a really, really important part. That's hard because, number one, you don't end up spending a lot of time together. People are going in all different directions. We've got a very large organization in many, many countries around the world. Our leaders are out a lot. And so the simple fact is you're not spending as much time together as you probably could or should. And when you're together, it's pretty focused. We did an interesting exercise when I first got onto the senior leadership team. I'm responsible for putting the agendas together when our senior lead team gets together. So I asked some simple questions like, what goes on the agenda, right? And what I realized was we had never really chartered this team. And so we went through an exercise and we started with, what is the purpose of this team? And we came up with some very large ideas like run the company, chart the course of the future, resource the work, make sure that your shareholders are still interested in buying your stock. And so when we shape our agendas, it's big. We also went through the exercise of asking, what do we want this to be like inside the meetings? And what do we want this to be like outside the meetings? And we have that document, the charter. What do we want it to be like inside and what it would be like outside? That goes behind every agenda every time we get together. And we take a look at it and we evaluate ourselves every meeting. It's a discipline that forces us to acknowledge we're not perfect, but we're improving. And we understand how important it is for our success.
So I want to talk about two things on that. And one of them is the role. So really, do you see yourself as you're putting together the agenda, but do you also see that CHRO role as being responsible for helping make the functioning of the team as functional as possible?
Absolutely. And so the way that we put the agendas together, the way that we interact, I spend a tremendous amount of time in other people's offices within our executive team. I encourage our executive. I told our CEO when I first got this role, I'm going to spend way more time with my colleagues than I am with you. There is going to be a relationship that I have with them that is as or more important than my relationship with you. And we had a very open conversation about that right off the bat.
Is it that you're trusting them to be working for the good of the overall organization and not their own personal gain, but also not just the gain of their own function, so that they're trusting you to do what's best for IP overall and not just what's best for the HR function?
That's all of it. And there's probably another element in addition to that. The expectation should be that we are working together with our members of our team to help them be successful. I should be asking myself the question, what does international paper need? How does HR's role play into that? How can I communicate the importance of that to my colleagues? But how can I also ask the question, what can I do to support your success in your business or your function? That's the mentality that goes along with this. And we're trying to drive that. Again, we're far from perfect, Anthony. We're far from perfect on this. But I think the awareness of the importance of it is really, really critical.
So So that sounds like a really challenging position that I don't know if we see at other levels of the organization, where your loyalty is too strong a word, but where you're really trying to help a top-level team that may not always be in line with what might be very best for the people that you're responsible for directly in your line.
Yeah, it's a significant challenge. The good news is that every time you get it right, the return is massive. And people can feel it. One of the things we forget about often, especially in a company like International Paper, most of us on the senior leadership team have been with the company a long time. We started very early in our careers, and we remember what that was like. And so there's sometimes a bit of hesitancy around acknowledging we're at a level of the organization where people are watching. And they pay attention to not only what you do, but how you do it. If you're aware of that and you realize that your collaboration will not only help the relationship of the senior team, but there's a flow-through effect into the organization because of the example that you said. If you really get that, suddenly it has this exponential impact on the organization, because what you're really talking about is what is the culture that you want to create. That culture needs to start with that top team.
So if you're working well with the marketing group at the top level, then you think that's going to permeate down through the organization so that HR at lower levels will also be sharing information.
That's true, and the inverse is also true.
Okay.
And so there's a responsibility to work in the way that we want the organization to work, and we take that seriously.
So does that tie in? Part of your title is head of global citizenship, I think, right? So I don't think there are very many others that have that in their title. What does that mean at IP and to you personally?
Yeah, functionally, the responsibilities that are under global citizenship are internal and external communications, sustainability, philanthropy, community engagement. The whole area of sustainability for companies today is becoming central to what investors and customers are interested in. Reputational risk issues are reviewed by the board. These are big issues today in running public companies. Global citizenship puts all of that together, and so you think about internal and external communications, think about sustainability strategy, think about what we're doing out in our communities and the reputation that you're developing. Those are areas that are really, really important to a company like International Paper. We're an industrial company. A lot of our locations, our mill locations at least, are in communities where we are the largest employer by far in the county or the area. We are a known manufacturer, and so there is work that we have to do to make sure, for the good of those communities, that we're operating today the way we should, and we're also making sure we're being really, really responsible citizens. When we think about sustainability, we think about it very broadly. Sustainability is not just about making sure that you're reducing emissions. Sustainability is also about ensuring safety of your workforce. For us, diversity is part of sustainability. It is ensuring that we can get to the future that we want, and we think of it that way. So when I think about global citizenship, it's really the central part of it is how do we sustain our organization? How do we make sure that all of the stakeholders around us have the same understanding of International Paper as how we understand it?
So this is really tied in closely then to the push recently of CEOs acknowledging that they're more stakeholders than just shareholders. Is that?
I like how you put that. I speak frequently with people about the work of the Business Roundtable. Mark Sutton, our CEO, is on the board of the Business Roundtable, and so was in those conversations. What Mark would say is that work, that statement by the Business Roundtable recently, simply acknowledged the expansion of how organizations think today. It's an acknowledgement. It's not a pivot. We have to, if we're going to be successful with investors, with customers, with our own employees, with the communities where we live and work, we have to take a bigger view than just profitability. Profitability is still critically important to the financial success of not only the company, but of all the stakeholders around it, but there are other stakeholders, and we have to continue to expand the attention that we provide to them. It's important. It's important from for making sure that international paper in 121 years is still around, just like it's been around for the last 121. Those are really important issues. And so this whole area of global citizenship, the whole area of, sustainability, for me is a very, very broad area. It's a critically important area for international paper because it's about the future, and that's what we should be concerned with.
Thank you very much for this conversation and for joining us.
It's my pleasure, Anthony. Thank you.
We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You just listened to another CHRO conversation. Today, Tom Plath of International Paper shared his views regarding how HR drives business success through the intersection of strategy, talent, and culture. He also discussed the leading role that HR should play in change. On behalf of all of us who are associated with the Master of Human Resources program and the Center for Executive Succession here at the University of South Carolina, thank you for joining us.